Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to On the Other Side, Leadership After Transition. Hey, haven't seen you in a couple of weeks. I was out doing some stuff, right? But always trying to make things better. And I'm really happy today to be able to get back into the swing of things and just have a good guest to come on. And I'm always out there searching for great people to come on. And today, I think that it's just as great as any other time. It's just a really good opportunity for you to learn some things about the transition process, hear a great story, and get some good tips. And for me, it's a great opportunity because I've had an opportunity to speak to the gentleman already, and I've already learned some great things. So I tell you, it's not an everyday occurrence, but we get to have Major General retired Craig Whelden on the show, and it's going to be a real interesting conversation. 30 years plus, or 30 years in the Army, but he's been a lot of time in the government world after that, and there's been a couple transitions, so he can speak to many different transitions, and we're going to get to that. We're also going to speak about his book that he's put out, and it's out there for people to listen to and really learn a lot from. I actually downloaded. I'm ready to go. It's Leadership: The Art of Inspiring People to Be Their Best, and I'm really looking forward to hearing it. It's on Audible, so we'll be able to listen to the audio version if you're like me, who takes rides in the car forever. So it'll probably take me a day to finish it because I'm in the car that long, but it's good. I can't wait. But without further ado, without a long introduction, I really want to bring him on. So Craig, welcome to On the Other Side. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jeffrey. Thanks for having me today.
I'm
actually, your listeners probably don't realize this, but you're in Florida and I'm in Hawaii. And it's a little cooler here than it is there, I suspect.
It's amazing. I'll tell you, I don't know if it's cooler there for certain. It's hot and muggy. You walk outside and you pass out. It's rough, right? So I typically ask that because over the past year, Craig, I got to be honest, I've had the opportunity to speak to folks everywhere, and it's been a great thing. It was actually one of my to-do lists was to get all 50 states, right? And then, some out in Germany and Korea and where we have people at. But the fact that you're here from Hawaii is an amazing thing. I love that because it shows our technology, our growth. We don't have to be a news station in order to reach out, and this is great because we get to bring information globally through this platform, and it's an awesome experience. So, hey, welcome from Hawaii.
Thank you. Mahalo.
Outstanding. So, well, let's get into it just so people kind of have an understanding of, if we go back into your career, we'll hit some highlights because your career spanned longer than mine. And well, hell, I'm 40, I turned 41 soon, and your career has taken that whole lifetime. And that's a whole bunch of leadership lessons that you learned in that time, and their books based on that. So let's talk about what you did in the military, highlights, and then we'll get into kind of the transition and what you're doing now.
Okay. So I was a ROTC product out of Purdue University in 1973, right after or just at the tail end of the Vietnam War. So Volunteer Army was brand new. I was part of that effort. And then I spent most of my time during the Cold War. So 30 years, 1973 to 2003. I was an armor officer, a cavalry guy, and I did that for 20 years until as a colonel, they made me a base commander. And I remember when they did that, I said to myself, I don't know anything about base operations, and I don't care to learn. The good news is that I did become a base commander, and I learned more than I possibly could have had I just stayed in the traditional route that I was in, which was armor and combat arms and all that sort of thing. That really was a turning point for me because it really shaped the rest of my life personally and professionally. And it really shaped my leadership skills because it was a very different audience, as you can imagine, going from a tank battalion or combined arms task force of 1,000 men to a base commander of 3,000 civilians, half of which were female, half of which were German, labor unions, childcare centers, town halls, all that kind of stuff. It was a completely different world. So I did all of that for 30 years, and then I retired in 2003, moved to Florida into the private sector. And about 5 years into that, my wife said, I want to go back to Hawaii, which was our last assignment. I was a deputy commander of U.S. Army Pacific. And I said, Hawaii's expensive. I'd have to get a job. She said, fair enough, get a job. So I started looking for opportunities to get back to Hawaii. And I found one with the Marine Corps. I like to tell people it's the same church, just a different pew.
Right.
So they hired me and took the Marine Corps is interesting because the Marine Corps is a bit anal about who they hire. If you're not a former Marine, you have to really demonstrate your worth. Right. So I was humbled and proud and appreciative that they gave me a chance. So I came on to be the executive director of Marine Corps Forces Pacific, a job that I currently have and will have for about 2 more months before I retire again.
Mm.
So I went from 30 years in uniform to 7 years in the private sector, and then from 7 years in the private sector to 9 years back in the federal service as a senior executive. And now I'm about to go again back to the private sector. So I've been through the transition. This will be my 3rd time. And largely because of that, I'm a guest speaker at all the transition seminars here in Oahu to all the services, Air Force, Navy, and Army as well.
That's amazing. So I would go back a little bit. I'd like to talk to you just briefly about your time as the base commander. I've had plenty of conversations with a lot of folks as they've gone to that route, and they're never excited. I mean, that's usually a position in which people are not too happy to get. Yeah. But what I always was told before, and I try to tell them as they were doing it, is there's so much information that you don't even know what you're about to learn. I mean, it gives you the opportunity to pretty much run a city, if you will. I mean, I can understand there's infrastructural things that you never had to deal with. There's just a lot of stuff that you can learn, and like you said, huge learning experience for you. So that was a pretty good thing. And now, do you think? I mean, have you used any of that knowledge of what you've done or what you did at that point in time here towards after the afterlife at all?
Yeah, I think my experience, and I only did that for 18 months. It was a 2-year tour with an option to go to 3 years. But at the 18-month mark, I got pulled out early to become the Chief of Staff of 3rd Infantry Division because my predecessor had been relieved for an ethical lapse. And then Major General Monty Meigs, who became a 4-star general, ultimately asked the Chief of Staff of the Army if he could pull me out early from command to become the Chief of Staff, and that was approved. But back to your point and your question, when I went into that job, I knew nothing about running a base. I knew something about being a customer on a base because I had been on that particular base, and that was the base that I stayed at because I was a G3, the operations officer of the 3rd Infantry Division in Würzburg, and I was slated to command the same base that I was living on.
Wow.
And so I was a square peg in a square hole, and it made sense.
Yep.
I didn't know anything about running a base, but I knew something about people, and I knew something about leadership, and I knew something about trust, faith, and confidence in your workforce. And I went into that with a understanding that they were going to teach me what I needed to know to help them do their job. And because I had been a customer for 18 months on that base and pretty much my entire adult life in previous bases, I kind of know what was right, what looks right, and what is wrong. Because it's just like all of us. We experience that. So I told everybody up front, I trust you to help me, and until you demonstrate that you're not worthy of that trust. That puts a healthy kind of pressure on people rather than a unhealthy type of pressure. And it was a wonderful experience. I learned more. I didn't learn as much about running a base, but I learned a heck of a lot about people.
Yeah.
Because it was such a different world with, 100%, almost 100% civilians as opposed to military people. They have to be led differently. And I think that's an important thing for people to understand is you can't lead everybody the same way. You have to understand who it is you're leading. And oftentimes, if it's a generational thing, it's a personality difference, it's a cultural difference. People need to be led in ways that will be successful. And oftentimes that means the leader has to adapt to the environment that they're in.
It's funny when you said that, I gasped, my eyes got big, and I was like, it's an amazing thing to think that the leader has to change and that people aren't cookie cutter and they're all the same. Right? So I think that we've evolved a little bit as humans. I mean, even in the military at that, as we went from, left, right, left, and they still march, don't get me wrong, but there's a little bit more of the thought of the human aspect of leadership. And that, like what you just thought was speaking on, is huge, right? You definitely need to understand as a leader that not everybody learns the same, not everybody is led the same, not the same thing motivates everybody. And you have to kind of learn those things so you can be that guy or gal that they want to follow, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, sure.
So talk to me a little bit about the transition. When you decided to retire, you had 30 years in, it was time to go. What was the thought process for you as you were getting ready to go? Was it something you had to head out, or was it just time, or what was that? What was that like for you?
So Christmas Eve of 1999, my sister committed suicide, and I learned about it on Christmas Day. When I was on vacation, ironically, here in Hawaii, I was living at the time in Florida, but I was on vacation here. That made me reflect on prioritization in my life, because as I thought about what led to her loss of life, I wanted to make sure that none of those kinds of circumstances affected my family. At the time, I had a 13-year-old daughter, and she wasn't at any risk, but I wanted to make sure she had every opportunity to succeed in life. And one of the ways I could do that was to help in one way by retiring from the Army and focusing my attention on giving her every opportunity I could. So I told the Army 2 years out in 2001, when I hit 30 years service, I'd like to retire. Why 30 years? It's because I was able to stay in Hawaii an extra year by doing that. And it also gave me the opportunity to retire as a 2-star general. Because had I retired earlier than that, I'd retire at the grade lower. I had to serve 3 years in grade in order to retire in that grade, and 30 years would have done that. The Army called me up and said, Chief of Staff of the Army would like you to reconsider. And I said, look, I will do whatever the Chief of Staff of the Army asks of me, because that's my nature. But if you're asking for my vote is that I stay the course and that I retire. So 24 hours passed. They came back and said, Chief is going to honor your request and he's going to let you go. So I did. I retired at 30 years. I moved to Celebration, Florida, where I had a home already. My daughter had 2 years of high school at Celebration High School. She graduated cum laude from the University of Central Florida. She had a part-time gig at Disney World that she turned into a full-time job on graduation. She's had a number of promotions there. She's a lighting designer for Disney World. She's married, owns her own home, travels all over the world. She turned out exactly the way I wanted her to. And it was not because of me. 99% of it was because of her. But my 1% contribution was stability and giving her some roots and some attention so that she got, and it was absolutely the right choice. I tell that story in chapter 19 of my book, and it's all about prioritization in life. One more story, if I can. I have a friend who went to West Point, and they have reunions all the time. And my friend was a retired colonel. He went up to a reunion. He saw a classmate of his over at the bar by himself. So he went over there and he said, hey, we'll call the guy John. Hey, John, how you doing? When John turned and looked at him, his eyes were watery. And my friend didn't know whether that's because he'd had too much to drink or because something was wrong. He said, hey, is everything okay? And John was a retired general officer. And he said, I busted my butt for 36 years. I did everything the Army told me to. They rewarded me with great assignments and command assignments. And along the way, my wife left me, and now my kids won't talk to me. So, it gets to the question of what were his priorities? When did he put them in place? And where was his family versus his career? So that's, I can connect those two stories, my own personal one with the one I just told, and tell you that I decided in 2001 that it's time for me to put my family first. And I didn't know what I was going to do.
Right.
I just knew that I needed to focus on my daughter, and that was the number one priority for me.
I got to tell you, is what's really interesting to me is throughout the interviews that I've done on this show, throughout the conversation I've had around the U.S. I mean, I've got an opportunity to travel to San Diego and San Antonio. I was up in D.C. and I've had a good opportunity to speak to a lot of veterans. And the one thing that is almost common across the board, the one key factor of decision to exit, whether that's through separation or just retirement, because whatever it may be, is family, right? And the idea that they want to, they set their priorities at some point, and the family was the most important thing, and nothing else mattered, and they knew that they'd be okay at some level. And to me, I think that's a motivating thing. I talked to a guy, interviewed a guy named Chris Crace. He is the EY, the lead veteran guy for EY now, and he was a captain in the Marine Corps, and really enjoyed his story because he talked specifically about the desire to be there for his children. He had been to Iraq about 3 times, I believe, with the Marines, and he said that was enough. he needed to be there for his child. And I mean, I talked to him. I went to lunch with him not too long ago, a couple of weeks back, and he's still. I mean, he'll tell that story, and it's when he says it, it's genuine. You can tell. And that's a lot of the stories I hear is about the decision to be around their family. And that's very similar to my story as well. We won't tell my story because I get very long-winded, Craig, and we'll be here all day long listening to me tell your story on when it's your time to talk. So what I would like to ask you is, as rank has roles, right? As we leave, whether you're a general officer, you're a senior enlisted guy, a junior enlisted guy, or even a junior officer, there's different things that we benefit from on the exit, right? What is for you anyway, as you left, do you think that, I mean, what when you decided to get out, do you think that, I mean, what role did that play in your mind? From a financial perspective, I'm sure you were situated well, but from a job perspective, from a desire to succeed, still having that military mindset, we like to climb the ladders, we like to move forward, we like those things. So what did you think when you were leaving? How did that affect you? I guess it's psychologically, or what was the next step?
So I tell people that when you decide you're going to retire or transition, retire means you're going to go fishing or play golf. Transition means you're going to go find something else productive to do.
Right.
Maybe it pays, maybe it doesn't pay, but most of the time you try to find something that pays, because retirement from the military is good. And obviously the more senior you are, the more you have, but still everybody's got their own lifestyle that they want to try to maintain. Mm-hmm. And if you retire at 20 years after, let's say, an enlisted soldier, and he joins at 18, gets out at 38, I'm 67 years old. That's a generation ago. And right. Here I am about to climb a new ladder at 67. I'll be 68 in October, and I'm starting over, all over again, with a new book, with a new speaking career, with new objectives, and I'm starting at the bottom. But the first thing I tell people is you have to decide, are you going to go to a job, or are you going to go to a location?
Right.
And that's the first decision you have to make. If you go to a location, then your job opportunities are more narrow because you're at that location. Unless you go to somewhere like Washington, D.C., and you had been in the military, but in most cases, if you're going to go to Orlando, Florida, or Spokane, Washington, and you've served 30 years in the Army or 20 years in the Army, the job opportunities are less than if you said, I'll go anywhere to do this kind of job.
Right.
So location or job? Okay. I decided location because I had a job and I didn't know what I was going to do. Yeah. So when I got to Celebration, Florida, I took a month or two off just to get my head thing. But I started 2 years before. Yeah. When I told the Army 2 years ahead of time, I said, okay, let me get ready for this transition. I actually traveled from Hawaii to Orlando on 2 different occasions for no other reason than to meet people.
Yeah.
Network, network, network. I cannot emphasize that more. Network, network, network. If you take nothing else from this podcast, networking. Resumes are great. They're necessary. But if you take a resume and put it on a job site and then hope you're going to get a call, good luck. So network. That's the first item. Second one is have a 30-second elevator speech in your back pocket all the time. Doesn't matter where you are. I do it all the time now, sitting on an airplane. I just got off the airplane from Pasadena, California, Sunday, after spending a couple of days there. And in both cases, going and coming, I gave the people sitting next to me a copy of my book, a signed copy of my book, told them a little bit about myself. And I had a 30-second. Who knows what that's going to lead to? Right. Maybe it'll lead to nothing, but you never know. I met a very, very, very senior and well-known public relations guy in the entertainment industry when I was in Pasadena this past weekend, who I gave a copy of my book to. And he said, if you give me a business card too. And I said, it's in my book. And we had a chat yesterday morning. So where will that go? I don't know. But he has represented over 30 Oscar winners and 20-something Grammy winners. He knows what he's doing.
Right.
So network, location or job, 30-second elevator speech. Make sure you have it. What I call a combination resume. And that's a whole nother topic. But for those of your listeners that are into resumes, combination resumes gives you the ability to, on the fly, readapt your resume to any particular need. Because you have a dozen or so skill sets identified with a
Yeah.
paragraph for each one, that when somebody says, we'd like you to be an X, you just go find the 6 or so that are X, you pull them off, you plug them in, and you hand them the resume. Follow-up. People want to hear follow-up. So when you meet somebody on an airplane or you meet somebody at a networking thing and they say, well, let's stay in touch. Watch my lips. Stay in touch. If you get an invitation to call, then call them back.
Right.
Because if you don't call them back, you don't send them an email, you don't thank them for whatever they did, even if it was a piece of advice, they're going to drop you like a rock and move on.
Yep.
So once you get connected, and then realize that nobody owes you a job. Nobody.
Yep.
Everybody's sympathetic for veterans, but guess what? There are a lot of homeless veterans on the street right now.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to hustle. You're not just, if you're used to 20 or 30 years in the military where just about everything is structured and there's a process and all that, none of that exists the day you take off your uniform.
Right.
You have to make it yourselves. So get up every morning, as Admiral McCraven said, make your bed and get on with it and take a step forward.
That's awesome. Great. All of that was great advice. I'll tell you one thing. You can tell the PR guy if he's looking for a bald guy with a long beard that for whatever he does, I'm right here. You got my number. No, I'm just kidding. But truly what you said is spot on, right? I mean, all the way through from the networking portion to the resume, what the value is. I mean, you can, I've heard it a million times, well, probably not but a lot, right? That, I submitted this resume. I submitted this resume. I put this resume here. I downloaded 1,000 resumes. I took 40 hours a week, because you'll hear people say, when you're transitioning, your job is to get a job. So spend 40 hours a week trying to get a job. And that idea is, okay, I'll send these resumes to all these job places that fit that requirement that I fit. The problem is that the system isn't designed to accept that. There's so much red tape along the way, whether that be the HR people or the system itself, the automated system. So it doesn't really help. But if you can talk to somebody and hand that resume to that person, that human being, it just enhances the percentage of you actually even getting in the door to have a conversation. What much more than the whole just application process. And then the other thing you talked about, which I really like. I mean, just in general, as a word of thumb, is you're not owed anything. There's some things to work on, right? The value that you provide is, I mean, you sit there and you wait and you try to tell people, man, but I didn't get the follow-up. Everything ties up, right? So I'm not owed anything. We want follow-up, so why wouldn't we do it, right? So when we're sitting here and we apply for a job or we do something and we're waiting for a call back and we don't get it, we're really, really angry. However, when someone says, hey, here's my card, or here's the thing, give me a call, keep in touch, and you don't do it, it's the same concept. It's a give and take situation. The whole transition process is not just about taking, it's about giving. Having that 30-second elevator speech, engage, keep interest, even if it's, just something, look, this is what I did, this is what I do, and this is what I want to do. It can be very simple. And it can be intriguing. If it's intriguing, they're going to ask more questions. And that's significant. It's just understanding that I should have something, as opposed to let me run on forever. Because like I said, Craig, I'll say it about 16 more times before we're done. I talk a lot, but I do know how to do that 30-minute I say 30-minute elevator pitch, the 30-second, hey, this is what I did, this is what I do, and this is what I'm looking to do. And then move on to the next guy or gal to have a conversation with in a networking event. But that's amazing that you actually flew. I'm impressed. I mean, that's a big deal. With technology nowadays, I'm with sites like LinkedIn and just things of that nature. To fly from Hawaii to Celebration to actually meet folks, that's huge, because LinkedIn, even this right here, this would take us a couple conversations to where we could say, hey, can we jump on a webcast, whether it be Skype or Zoom or we'd be live, whatever it may be, to have that conversation. But nothing beats a handshake, getting out there and actually having that one-on-one time. So that's amazing that you did that. So kudos to you. I wish more people would take the advantage of getting to a place where they're going and actually getting out there to meet some folks. A lot of people are, again, they're trying to get a job so much that they're working at the people or at the Indeed and the job search places, but they're not in the LinkedIn looking for the people searches, so they can find people within the organization that they can connect with that have similarities, maybe even past veterans that are in there, because you can break it down. So it's really interesting.
Let me add one more piece of advice, because if you start 2 years early, which is what I did, and in my case now, I started about a year and a half out, because there's a lot of things you need to do before you take off the uniform in order to ensure some success when you take off the uniform. So how do you keep track of everything you do, who you talk to, when you talk to them? What did they say? I started an Excel spreadsheet, and I started putting across top on the column on the left-hand side the name, the organization, the contact information, and then for every cell to the right, it would be chronological, left to right. Okay, my initial contact with John Doe was on this date. This is what we talked about. You just type it into that cell.
Yeah.
And then if you are invited to do a follow-up, like in 2 weeks, or let's assume you don't get a follow-up invitation, but you should do a follow-up, then you mark your calendar in 2 weeks. Hey, go back to the spreadsheet, see John Doe, you need to contact him in some way. So that spreadsheet is the way, because I can't keep all this stuff in my head. It's the only way I can keep organized is who did I talk to? When did I talk to them? What did I talk to them about? What's the follow-up? And when things kind of fizzle out and nothing's going to come of that, then that person, you can easily drop that cell to the bottom and and I color code them. You know, green is the most promising, yellow is not so much, red means they're either, they're not calling back, or just delete them.
Yeah.
But some kind of a management system that keeps track of all these moving parts, because it's going to span a course of a year or two.
Yeah.
That you start before you go.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So when I decided to retire this time from federal service as a civilian senior service executive position, it was primarily driven by family considerations. Again, my wife said, our daughter's in Orlando. We only see her every 2 years. And I have family. She has family up and down the East Coast. It's time to move on. They're not coming out here as much as we'd like. We're not seeing them. We're not getting any younger. I said, okay, so now we're headed to South Carolina. What am I going to do? I want to speak in front of audiences about leadership and life lessons. That's really what turns my crank. Okay, how do I do that? So I started making phone calls to people who have done that. And they said, a book will get you started. It will get you in the door. So I wrote a book. I could go on and on for how this journey evolved, but I ended up writing a book. I established a website. I did a video. I did 2 videos. They're both on my website. I started networking with people. I'm working with PR firms. All of this requires some investment, monetary investment up front. It's not cheap, but it's worth the investment, because the payoff at the other end is hopefully some paid speaking engagements. And when I'm not doing paid speaking engagements, I hope to do unpaid speaking engagements for a couple of reasons. One is to give back. I'm going to be 2 hours from the Citadel, which is a military college near Charleston, in my new home. I'm going to be less than 30 minutes from Parris Island, which is a Marine Corps training base, and I'm going to offer my services there to do some mentoring, some leadership courses, presentations, and so forth. That keeps me in practice for the paid gigs, which hopefully corporate America would pony up for. So all of that started a year ago, and I'm in, I think, a pretty good position to hit the ground running when I get to South Carolina. So don't start thinking about what you're going to do next the week before you get out.
So that's the moral of the story, right? I mean, to have a plan and understand that plans kind of change along the way. I mean, life happens, right? And we kind of adjust. But if you know what you want to do, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things. And to me, it's one of the biggest takeaways when I hear a lot of stories is if you just know what you want to do, not specifically to a job, but where do you want to be in life? What do you want to do in life? You can get to it. It's a million different ways to travel to get there. But I mean, using you as an example is an amazing thing to understand. You want to have this paid speaking engagements. There are steps to take. There's a lot of things to do. Having a speaker's reel, having a book as a calling card, because it breeds credibility. All those things are steps in which you're taking. And it's interesting that you are talking about starting from the ground up again, right? At the age you're talking about, but it's an amazing thing. And I give you kudos and props, because people like me, as we're getting into it, it's strenuous. It's stressful. It's a lot of hard work involved in it. But if you know where you want to be, if you truly understand where your happiness lies, it's really, it wakes you up every day. It's calling you, and it's keeping you in that same structural military format that, I mean, I don't know if when you started as a lieutenant that you wanted to be a general officer. I know when I was a private, I didn't aspire to be a sergeant major. I just aspired to get out of trouble. I wanted to get promoted, but I wanted to learn some tools and trades and tricks, along the way. But as I started to get promoted and understand my value within the military, then promotion was an important thing to me. And to understand that, okay, I want to be a sergeant major. There are some things that I must do along the way to be a sergeant major. And like you, as a speaker wanting to have speaking engagements, there are some things along the way that I have to do in order to get there, and being financially stable and doing certain things, that's one of them, right? So I give you a lot of kudos for actually having that vision and then trying to achieve it. And well, you're going to achieve it here shortly. And the one thing that you will learn, and that you've already learned, and you've made mention when we talk about networking in this business specifically that you're getting ready to embark on, the networking is huge. It's because referrals are basically the way you go about speaking. And it's an amazing industry, if you will. And I wish you luck in it.
Oh, thank you.
So let me ask you this question. So as you came in as a young man out of college, out of being a Boilermaker, right, going to Purdue, and that was good. Did you play any sports, by the way, at Purdue?
Not at Purdue. I played 1 year of football in high school and learned very quickly I was too small at about 135 pounds to play football. So I didn't play a fall sport. I played basketball 3 years, and I was on the tennis team for 3 years.
Okay.
So those were the two sports that I really carried in high school. Did intramural sports in college. Okay. I know that you have a baseball background, and that's probably why you asked this question. I'll tell you an interesting story. I was probably best at baseball. And when I was on an all-star team and all that when I was 14 years old. And then my dad, who was in the Air Force, got assigned to, guess where? Europe. And there's no baseball in Europe.
Yeah,
so
right.
I get to Paris, France, which is where we headed, and there's no baseball. Yeah. And I was crestfallen, and I thought, okay, I got to figure out what I'm going to do. And that's when I discovered basketball and switched over. So, but I know you have I can see the stuff in the background.
I have a Yankees background.
Yankees thing, yeah.
Yeah, I love the game itself, but it's great. No, it's interesting. But when you did come in, when you entered the military at that time, what traits or characteristics do you think that you had coming in, and what traits from a leadership perspective, and what traits do you think the Army brought out of you and actually really molded throughout your 30-year career?
Well, I first discovered leadership, I think, at age 14 when I became an Eagle Scout. And for me, the journey to becoming an Eagle Scout was not about leadership. It was all about climbing a mountain and getting to the top. And once I got up there, I didn't really know what I had because then people started turning to me for leadership, and because I was an Eagle Scout. Then in high school, I got involved in student government. I was a leader on the basketball team. I was captain of the basketball team when I was a senior. And then I did a lot of student government stuff at Purdue University as well. I had only planned to go into the Army for 4 years because I had an ROTC scholarship, and I had a 4-year obligation. And then one thing led to another, and 4 years turned into 30. But leadership is a journey, clearly. And I think it's part nature, part nurture. Some people have in their DNA leadership skills that other people don't have. It's just the way they're born. They inspire people. Their demeanor is such. I don't know if I told the 3-star general story. I think I told that before we came on live.
Yes, sir.
So let me tell that story real quick. I worked for when I was a 2-star. I worked for a 3-star who was a brilliant man, very, very capable, consummate gentleman, never raised his voice in anger ever. And I had a colonel once tell me, "This is the toughest guy I've ever worked for." And I looked at him like, "What?"
What?
I said, "What? Why do you say that?" And he said, "Because I never wanted to disappoint him." Bingo. I knew exactly what he meant then.
Right.
And that's because he was inspired to get up every day, to go to work, to perform at the top of his game, not just for the organization, but for this commander. And he wanted to make sure that at the end of the day that he did what the commander needed him to do, what he intended him to do, and he felt good. If you go to Fort Benning, Georgia, in front of Infantry Hall, there's a statue, and it's a statue of a leader, squad leader perhaps, platoon leader perhaps, whose and it says on the front, "Follow me." And as you know, the motto of the infantry is "Follow me." And he's got his arm extended, and he's going like this, and he's turning his head slightly, just enough so that the soldiers behind him can hear him yelling, "Follow me."
Mm-hmm.
That's a leader who's out in front. That's a leader who's confident in his leadership skills enough to know that he doesn't have to stand behind with a bayonet and push these guys into harm's way. All he has to do is say, "Follow me," and they're inspired to follow him. So I think the military, the Army, and the Marine Corps in particular, because it's all about people in those two services, less so about the platforms. And the Army and the Marine Corps, we try to find good leaders to bring into the service, and then we give them the best training possible.
Yep.
So it's really a wonderful institution. I mean, all the schooling that I had over a 30-year career and continue to get as a senior executive with the Marine Corps is phenomenal. They just don't do that on the outside.
Right.
So when you combine innate skills with training, it really produces something pretty wonderful.
That's outstanding. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you about one of those you can't make up stories, right? And it's one of the things that I love about the interview, because I get to hear all kind of different stuff, from funny to just historical, that where people were. And I'm always wait for this moment. But before I do, I just want to ask for the people that are watching, if someone wanted to reach out to Craig Whelden, where would you want them to reach out to? Where's the place that you check the most for? Is it LinkedIn, or is it an email? What is it that where you look the most?
Well, I am on LinkedIn, and I have rarely reject an invitation to connect with somebody. So, I mean, there are every now and then there's a strange request, and I think maybe I should steer away from that.
Right.
But I'm not in the business of rejecting people from LinkedIn. So you can find me easily on LinkedIn. Secondly, craigwhelden.com is my website. It tells you all about me, tells you all about my book. You can access Amazon or Audible to get my book. I've got over 22 testimonials from different people that I grew up with, mostly in the military, but not exclusively. There's 2 videos on my website. One of them is me actually giving a presentation in front of, I was a graduation speaker just 2 weeks ago at the Pacific Leadership Academy, and I had somebody videotape it. Then there's an introductory video, which is just about 2 minutes long. There's an info@craigwhelden.com email on my website. So all you have to do is, you want to contact, there's a contact page on my website. So I'm about the easiest person in the world to find, as long as you spell my name right.
Right. So
it's often misspelled, and then they say, "Well, I couldn't find you." Well, the reason is because you spelled it D-O-N and not D-E-N. It's E, not O. So I can see it scrolling at the bottom of the screen. That's right.
I'll write it down for you. So it's www.craigwhelden.com. So WHELDEN, and for people to reach out and just, hey, love the website, by the way. It's great. It's very informative. It's put together well. I mean, it's very easy to navigate. So it's great website. So moving on from that, now it's one of those you can't make this stuff up moment stories. So share a story of in your career, and just as some time where just something happened that if you talked to a person who never served a day in the military, they'd be like, no way. They just wouldn't believe it.
I don't know how much time we have. I got 2 that are kind of interesting. They both occurred very early in my career. The first one was, I was the officer in charge of a tank firing range at Fort Hood, Texas, and it was 2:00 in the morning. And back in those days, we didn't have thermal sights and able to see the target well, so we had searchlight tanks. And at Fort Hood, Texas, there was a hill on the left-hand side, and we had a tank go up there, and it was a searchlight tank. So I had what we called a Prick 77, which was an old radio, and I'd call the searchlight tank, illuminate target 3. And he would turn on his IR searchlight, and then the tank that's going down the course would fire at the target. Well, we didn't have contact with the tank, and I couldn't get him to answer the phone. And pretty soon, this young soldier comes down. He says, "Hey, sir, the batteries died." And I couldn't get something up there to recharge the batteries, so I sent another tank up there. So another tank goes up there, and in the middle of the night, 2:00 in the morning, he lines up next to the tank that was the searchlight tank. He's now the new searchlight tank. Well, that tank caught on fire, and the wind was blowing in such a way that it blew the flames onto the original tank that was dead. So now I had 2 tanks on fire.
Oh man.
And I look up at the thing. I couldn't get them to answer. Searchlight tank. Nobody's answering. And I look up there, and all I see is this glow on top of the hill. And pretty soon, this breathless Specialist 4 runs up the tower and says, "Sir, the tank's on fire." He was the driver. So the rest of that story is at 2:00 in the morning. But of course, Fort Hood, Texas is huge. The fire department's a long way away, and fire trucks can't get to the top of that hill anyway. They're not designed to climb the hill like a tank is. So 2 tanks just kind of burned into shells up there on things. So I had a very difficult time explaining as a second lieutenant to my battalion commander the next morning why I allowed 2 tanks to burn to the ground up there. So the moral of the story is I survived that. Yeah. Why? Because the battalion commander had some trust, faith, and confidence in me as an officer, as a soldier, and he gave people second chances. Yeah. And he gave me a second chance. Awesome. And I retired as a 2-star general. Now, break the other story. I'm in Ranger School in 1973. And I haven't eaten, I haven't slept in I don't know how long. We're all kind of zombie-like. We're all lost 20, 25 pounds. We're in the mountains in Dahlonega, Georgia, and we're on a patrol, and it's 2:00 in the morning. And the only thing I can see in front of me are the 2 luminescent tapes on the back of the patrol cap of the guy in front of me, and all of a sudden it disappears. And the reason it disappeared is because he took a left, he went into the woods, took 2 steps, took a right, took 2 steps, took a right 2 steps, and then he came back onto the trail and kept going. So I went up to him and I said, "Hey, what did you do that for?" And he gave me a very, very straight face, and he said, "There was a refrigerator in the middle of the trail, and I had to walk around it." And he was perfectly serious. Yeah. So he was hallucinating in the middle of the night because he hadn't eaten, he hadn't slept, and he was a zombie-like. That experience and many, many other sleepless nights I had across the time led me that when I did a master's program in Command and General Staff College years later, one of my papers that I did was on sleep deprivation. Yeah. And what it does to the human mind when you don't get enough sleep. Wow. And as a leader, I learned that if I just drive people into the ground with no sleep, their performance is going to drop exponentially. Yep. And so I always made sure from battalion command on that I had people, because your performance drops like a rock when you can't think straight. And when you don't get any sleep, you don't think straight. Simple as that.
Yeah, it's always interesting that you keep pushing and pushing because this thing has to get accomplished today or whatever that mission may be. But the fact of the matter is you're killing your folks as we're doing it. And more importantly, the later in the evening it gets or the later in the time it gets, the less productive it is. And more importantly, it's not very good. The outcome is usually not that great. You're doing it tomorrow morning anyway,
Right.
Interesting. Well, good. Well, Craig, before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to say whatever it is you want. I mean, you got people listening, and there's going to be 1,000+ people listening and some more. So besides your book, I want to make sure I give that hit on that leadership, the art of inspiring people to be their best. I downloaded it on Audible. It's on Audible for you audio book folks like me who just like to listen while I ride. Download it. It's going to be great. I can't wait. I'll put a review on it and I'll let you all know how it is. As a matter of fact, when we're done here, I'll take the link and put it in the comments section here so y'all have it. I'll put it on the Facebook page so people can see it. But what else, what can you or what would you like to say before you head out?
Well, I wrote the book in order to pay back 50 years of experience that I've had to the next generation. And if this doesn't lead to a speaking career, then I feel like I've done something, and I can certainly learn how to fish. I'm building a house in South Carolina. I put a dock in the back. I hope to get a boat. I don't know how to fish, but I'll learn how to fish. But what I'd love to be able to do is continue to pay forward to the next generation what I've learned. And if you buy the book, what you're going to find is that there's the best means of communications is storytelling. That's the best means. So this is not a dry academic read, I can assure you. The kinds of stories that I've been telling today are all through this book and every single one of the 24 chapters. And so it's a very, very interesting read, as well as one I think people can learn from. Okay. And it's got rave reviews. I've got lots and lots of 5-star reviews on Amazon already. So,
well, I'm reading it. I'm going to read it, Craig. I can't wait. And listen, I'll tell you what, I'll offer you. I would offer you. I'm not going to offer you. I would offer you my fishing guidance. I would teach you how to fish. But yeah, I'm not good at it. I call what I do casting because I don't
Yeah.
catch anything, and I'm not good at it. But I know a bunch of folks that would love to get up to the South Carolina to teach it because we have a whole bunch of water, and we got some folks that hit the water daily, and they really.
Yeah.
I don't hit it daily, but I'd like to. Anyhow, Craig, thank you so much for your time. I truly appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation with you. I learned an awful lot today, and I really am truly looking forward to listening to the book starting tomorrow morning on my way into work.
All right, Jeffrey. Thanks so much. Enjoyed it as well.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. So we'll wrap it up until next time I see you on the other side. Craig, take care now.
Thank you, my friend.
You're welcome, sir.